I still remember the cold that December evening in Chicago, not the kind that bites your skin when you step outside, but the kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. The snow had been falling since morning, blanketing the suburban streets in a thick, muffled silence. Through the frosted windows of my childhood home, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the white landscape, creating an almost magical scene. But magic, I would soon learn, doesn't fix broken families. It had been 4 years since I'd spent Christmas with them. 4 years of excuses, of, I have to work, and, maybe next year. The truth was simpler and more painful, I had run. After my divorce, after losing my job at the marketing firm downtown, after realizing that every time I called home I felt smaller and less significant, I had simply stopped trying. I moved to Portland, started over, built a new life with new friends who didn't know the version of me that had failed at marriage, at career, at being the daughter my parents had hoped for. But this year felt different. I was 34 now, more stable, working as a freelance graphic designer with a decent client base. I had gone to therapy. I had learned to set boundaries, to advocate for myself, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved a seat at my own family's table. So when my mother called in November, her voice tentative and small, asking if I'd come home for Christmas, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The flight from Portland to O'Hare was turbulent, but nothing compared to the turbulence in my stomach as the taxi pulled up to the house on Elmwood Avenue. The same red brick facade, the same crooked mailbox my father had promised to fix for a decade, the same wreath on the door that my mother bought from the church fundraiser every single year. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, frozen in time like a snow globe you only shake once a year. My mother answered the door with tears in her eyes, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, her signature Christmas scent. "Sarah," she whispered, and for a moment, I felt like maybe this had been the right decision. My younger brother, Michael, appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable in a Christmas sweater that was clearly a gift he'd been forced to wear. He gave me an awkward wave. "Hey, stranger." My father didn't come to the door. I heard his voice from the living room, calling out to my mother about the football game, about whether dinner was ready yet, about everything except the fact that his eldest daughter had just walked through the door after 4 years of absence. I had prepared for this. In therapy, Dr. Martinez and I had role-played difficult family interactions. I had practiced setting boundaries, expressing my needs clearly, not taking the bait when someone tried to push my buttons. But no amount of practice could have prepared me for the actual weight of that silence, my father's deliberate choice not to acknowledge my arrival. The house was exactly as I remembered, too warm, too cluttered with decades of accumulated memories. Christmas decorations covered every surface, the porcelain nativity scene on the mantel, the felt stockings with our names stitched in gold thread, mine still hanging there, dusty and forgotten, the artificial tree in the corner drowning in ornaments, each one with a story my mother loved to tell. Michael's first Christmas, my dance recital, the year we went to Disney World. Every ornament a memory, every memory a reminder of a family I had once belonged to. I had spent weeks choosing their gifts. For my mother, a beautiful hardcover cookbook from a Portland chef she'd mentioned loving during one of our brief phone calls. For Michael, a first edition of his favorite sci-fi novel that had taken me 3 weeks to track down. For my father, and this one I'd agonized over, a vintage fishing lure collection, the kind he'd talked about wanting when I was a kid and we'd spend Saturday mornings at the lake, before everything got complicated. I wrapped each present carefully, wrote heartfelt cards, included specific memories that showed I'd been paying attention, that I remembered, that I still cared despite the distance. These gifts were my olive branch, my proof that I wanted to bridge the gap that had grown between us. The afternoon passed in a blur of awkward small talk and careful navigation. My mother asked about Portland, the weather, the coffee shops, whether I'd made friends. She asked everything except the questions that mattered. Was I happy? Was I lonely? Did I still think about coming home? My brother talked about his job at the tech startup, his new girlfriend Amy who couldn't make it because she was with her own family. He was polite but distant, like we were acquaintances catching up at a high school reunion rather than siblings who had once built blanket forts and stayed up late trading secrets. My father remained in his recliner, eyes fixed on the television, participating in the conversation only when directly addressed. When I walked past him to help my mother in the kitchen, he didn't look up. When I asked if he wanted something to drink, he grunted a response. The message was clear: my presence was tolerated but not celebrated. I had expected this, I told myself. I had prepared for this. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are two very different things. Each small rejection landed like a paper cut, not deep enough to bleed dramatically, but stinging enough to remind you it's there with every movement. Dinner was the main event, the moment I'd been building toward. My mother had made her famous prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls, and her signature cranberry sauce that was more like a relish. The dining room table was set with the good china, the pattern with tiny blue flowers that had belonged to my grandmother. Christmas candles flickered in the center, casting dancing shadows on the walls. We sat in our assigned seats, the same seats we'd occupied for decades. My father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, Michael across from her, and me at the far end, the seat that had always been mine but now felt like I was sitting in a different zip code. The physical distance seemed to mirror the emotional chasm I was trying to cross. My mother said grace, thanking God for family, for health, for bringing us all together again. Her voice cracked slightly on that last part, and I wondered if she knew how fragile this reunion really was, how much hope I'd pinned on this one evening. The meal started quietly, just the sound of silverware on china and the occasional, pass the salt, or, this is delicious, Mom. I tried to engage, asking Michael about his work, complimenting my mother's cooking, even attempting to draw my father into conversation about the Bears season. He answered in monosyllables, his attention divided between his plate and some invisible point beyond the table. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my mind. I knew I needed to be the one to break through, to show them that I was here not just physically but emotionally, that I wanted to rebuild what we'd lost. So I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and with genuine enthusiasm in my voice, I said, I'm so glad to be here with you all. Mal posso esperar para trocar presents com vocês, I can't wait to exchange presents with you guys. I'd been practicing a little Portuguese, thinking it would be a fun surprise, a way to show I'd been growing and learning. The words came out slightly clumsy but warm, filled with the hope that had carried me through the flight, through the awkward afternoon, through every moment of discomfort since I'd walked through that door. My father's reaction was immediate. He let out a short, sharp laugh, not the kind of laugh that invites you to join in on a joke, but the kind that makes you the joke. It was dry, almost cruel, cutting through the tentative warmth I'd been trying to build. It was the sound of dismissal, of mockery, of a door slamming shut. The laugh hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything it touched. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Michael's eyes dropped to his plate. And I sat there, feeling heat rise to my cheeks, feeling the sting of humiliation spread through my chest like I'd swallowed broken glass. What's funny? I managed to ask, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. My father shook his head, that smirk still playing on his lips. Nothing. Nothing's funny. But the way he said it, the dismissive tone, the casual cruelty, it said everything. It said, you're naive. You're foolish. You think you can just show up after 4 years and we'll play happy family? You think presence and enthusiasm will fix what's broken? My mother tried to smooth things over, her voice bright and artificially cheerful. The presents. Yes, we'll do those after dessert, like always. I made your favorite pie, Sarah, apple with that crumb topping you love. But I was barely hearing her. My mind was spinning, replaying that laugh over and over, analyzing every nuance, every shade of meaning. And then, with a sinking feeling that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body, I realized something. We'll do those after dessert, like always, my mother had said. But what did that mean, exactly? My mind raced back through memories of past Christmases, trying to remember the ritual. We always did Secret Santa, each person drew a name and bought for just one person, not for everyone. It kept things simple, my mother always said, less stressful, more meaningful. I looked around the table with new eyes, seeing what I'd been too hopeful to notice before. Under the tree, I could see wrapped presents, but there were only 4 of them. 4 presents for 4 people. If we were doing Secret Santa, and I was included, there should be 5. Unless. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had done the name drawing without me. Of course they had, it happened weeks ago, probably right after Thanksgiving, like it always did. And they hadn't included me because I hadn't been here, because I hadn't been part of the family in any meaningful way for 4 years, because you don't include people who've made it clear they don't want to be included. Except I did want to be included. I was here, wasn't I? I had said yes to my mother's invitation, had bought plane tickets, had spent hours choosing and wrapping presents, had walked back into this house with my arms full of gifts and my heart full of hope. But none of that mattered, because in their minds, I had already made my choice. I had chosen Portland, chosen distance, chosen to build a life that didn't include them. And now, my father's laugh seemed to say, I expected them to just welcome me back like nothing had happened. I expected presence and warmth and inclusion. I set down my fork, no longer able to pretend I had an appetite. I didn't realize you'd already done the Secret Santa drawing, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother looked stricken, her eyes darting between me and my father. Michael suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. My father just continued eating, as if I hadn't spoken at all. We didn't know for sure if you'd make it, my mother finally offered, her words stumbling over themselves. You know how it is, with flights and weather and everything so uncertain. But we all knew that was a lie. I had confirmed my flight 2 weeks ago. I had called to ask about dinner timing. I had sent my mother daily texts counting down to my arrival. They had known I was coming. They had simply chosen not to include me. The rest of the meal passed in agonizing slow motion. My mother tried desperately to fill the silence with chatter about neighbors I didn't remember and church events I hadn't attended. Michael excused himself as soon as he cleared his plate, mumbling something about helping with dishes but disappearing into the basement instead. My father finished eating and returned to his recliner without a word. I helped my mother clear the table, the 2 of us moving around the kitchen in a dance we'd perfected over decades. She washed, I dried. She talked, I listened. She apologized without actually apologizing, explaining without actually explaining, justifying without actually justifying. You have to understand, Sarah, it's been hard on your father. When you left, when you didn't come back, when you barely called, he took it personally. You know how he is, he doesn't express his feelings like your mother does. He just withdraws. And this Christmas, when your brother asked if we should include you in the drawing, your father said, well, he said we shouldn't count on you actually showing up. I focused on drawing a plate, watching my hands move mechanically, feeling absolutely numb. I'm here though. I showed up. I know, sweetheart. I know you did. She paused, her hands stilling in the soapy water. But showing up once doesn't erase 4 years of being gone. Her words, meant to explain, felt like an indictment. She was right, of course. I had been gone. I had chosen to leave, had chosen distance over discomfort, had prioritized my own healing over family obligation. But I had thought, naively, apparently, that making the effort to come back would mean something. I had thought that growth and change and genuine desire to reconnect would be enough. I had been wrong. We finished the dishes in silence. When we returned to the living room, Michael had reappeared with his girlfriend Amy. Apparently she'd decided to stop by after all. The timing felt deliberate, a buffer against the awkwardness, fresh energy to dilute the tension. Time for presents, my mother announced with forced cheerfulness, and I watched as the ritual unfolded without me. Michael drew Jamie, Amy's best friend who apparently was part of their Christmas now. My mother drew Michael. My father drew my mother. And my mother's best friend Carol, who I'd barely remembered was part of this, drew my father. They opened presents with appropriate enthusiasm. Michael loved his book from me, Amy complimented the wrapping on gifts that weren't meant for her, my mother cried over the cookbook and hugged me tightly. My father accepted the fishing lures with a nod, examining them briefly before setting them aside. "Nice," he said, and it felt like the bare minimum of acknowledgement. And then it was over. No one said anything about the elephant in the room, the fact that while I had brought gifts for everyone, no one had brought anything for me. They all acted like this was normal, like this was fine, like I hadn't just been publicly excluded from my own family's Christmas tradition. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag and exhaustion. My mother hugged me goodnight, whispering that she was glad I'd come. Michael waved awkwardly. My father didn't look up from the television. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by posters of bands I no longer listened to and trophies from achievements that no longer mattered, I sat on the edge of my old twin bed and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I had come home hoping for reconciliation, for healing, for proof that family bonds could survive years of neglect and hurt. Instead, I had received a masterclass in exactly where I stood, on the outside, looking in, always welcome to visit but never truly part of the circle again. My father's laugh echoed in my mind, that dry, dismissive sound that had said more than any words could. It had told me that my effort didn't matter, that my presence didn't change anything, that I had burned this bridge 4 years ago and no amount of presence or enthusiasm or desperate hope would rebuild it. I looked at my phone, at the contacts list, at the friends in Portland who had become my real family. They were the ones who had held me through my divorce, who had celebrated my small victories, who had shown up consistently and without judgment. They were the ones who had included me in their traditions, who had made space for me at their tables, who had made me feel like I belonged. And I realized something that hurt and healed at the same time: family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who makes space for you. It's about who celebrates your presence instead of punishing your absence. I changed my flight for the next morning. I couldn't stay here, pretending everything was fine, swallowing my hurt to make everyone else comfortable. I had spent too many years doing that already. I had worked too hard in therapy to slip back into old patterns of minimizing my own feelings to preserve a peace that had never really existed. When I told my mother at breakfast that I was leaving early, she cried. She begged me to stay, to give it more time, to understand that change is slow and families are complicated. But I stood firm, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a small spark of pride. The old Sarah would have stayed, would have endured days more of discomfort just to avoid conflict. This Sarah knew better. My father didn't come out of his room to say goodbye. The message was clear, and for once, I was hearing it accurately: he didn't want me here. Whether that was because of hurt or anger or simply indifference, it didn't matter. The effect was the same. As the taxi pulled away from the house on Elmwood Avenue, I watched it disappear in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it was just another house on another suburban street. And I realized something: I had come home looking for acceptance, but what I'd found instead was clarity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to force belonging in spaces that don't want to make room for you. Sometimes growth means accepting that some relationships are too broken to fix, that some bridges are better left burned, that some families are better loved from a distance. The snow was still falling as my plane took off, Chicago disappearing beneath a blanket of white. I thought about that laugh one more time, my father's dry, dismissive laugh that had cut through my hope and exposed the truth I'd been too desperate to see. And then I thought about my friends in Portland, about the Christmas dinner they'd invited me to, about the way they'd told me, if things don't work out with your family, you always have a place here with us. I pulled out my phone and texted them, coming home early. Can I still join you for Christmas dinner? The response was immediate: of course. We saved you a seat. We always will. As I settled back into my seat, watching the clouds drift past my window, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, that kind of pain doesn't just disappear. But underneath it, growing stronger, was something else, the understanding that I deserved better than begging for crumbs of affection from people who saw my love as an inconvenience. I was flying toward my real home, toward people who had chosen me as much as I had chosen them. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Sometimes the family you're born into teaches you exactly what kind of family you need to build for yourself. My father's laugh had been meant to diminish me, to remind me of my place, to keep me small and apologetic and grateful for whatever scraps of belonging they chose to offer. Instead, it had set me free.